Buddy. It's a podcast, everything about hockey. Today, I thought I'd do another historical podcast, a little bit of a history of what I think happened, the most recent labor disputes, and how it really affected not only the team value, but how it also affected the player salaries and exactly why this occurred. I went way back till 1992, the first one I really want to focus on, and that was a strike that occurred in 1992. It only lasted a few days. It was supposed to be actually a strike that occurred that actually was going to affect the playoff. The two guys that really were in charge this whole entire first lockout was Bob Gooden. He was the NHLPA president, and John Ziegler. He was the NHL president. The whole reason why this whole entire first lockout in '92 occurred was how the salaries of these teams, player salaries actually, really rose to unbelievable amounts of money. It turns out that 56% of total revenue was dropped out by salaries. And this basically was a in-house league. In other words, I'm saying 70% of the revenue was from gate receipts. At the time, only 20% of the revenue generated was from broadcast. And I would mostly was focused on local media, radio and TV. National broadcast just wasn't there back in 1992. The main reason why salaries were so out of control back then was because of they kind of created their own restricted free agent nightmare. And why I say it's a nightmare is because if any player came out of a contract and negotiated and was trying to negotiate a contract with the original team, another team could swoop in and offer this guy a contract that's even bigger than what his original team wanted. And there was no control over that. The only thing they could do was either accept that offer, the original team, or let the player they were negotiating with go to the new team. Then they got draft picks for that offer. But that just drove up cost across the board for everybody. I mean, you could do this to a guy that's in his 20s, the guy is in his 30s. There was no restriction on total protection of players. And remember, there was no salary cap either. So the poor teams were getting players removed pretty easy because they didn't have the money to actually protect themselves from this. And also, the rookies, the young guys, didn't have a salary structure either. So they were allowed to go in there and demand signing bonuses and also performance bonuses, which really raised their salaries too. And it was a situation where and also you also remember there was no salary cap. So a team that made a lot of money through their own local broadcast, TV and radio, getting a full arena with a lot of gate receipts, they could actually outbid the less fortunate teams, the low end teams, on a regular basis for players. Of course, the NHLPA didn't have any problem with that. It was John Ziegler and the owners that really wanted to control the salaries. So this first attempt was to do this, but they really didn't accomplish anything out of that. It really gave the players' union a lot of strength, which later on is going to hurt the NHL. Really, the only thing they really accomplished was the NHLPA's John Gooden got. Now, remember, sports cards was actually really big back in the early '90s, and it was a $11 to $12 million a year uh, money that the NHLPA was getting out of this. So what they did was they actually got the NHL, John Ziegler, to agree to give them their part of the NHLPA's trading card revenue, another $8 million a year. That was basically the whole entire thing is what happened during this whole entire lockout was the NHLPA managed to get a lot more money out of the trading card industry. That was back in the big trading card boom. The other two things that the NHL owners got out of this whole entire little lockout or strike, actually, I should say strike was a strike, was that the restricted free agents, you had to be 30 to get a offer from another team. And also, they made the NHL draft, rookie draft. It was 12 rounds. They put that down to 10 rounds now. That was what the NHL owners got out of this strike. So in 1995, they decided to do this all over again because they really wanted to control the salaries. And what happened earlier on, like I said, with the being able to match contracts from other teams and having no rookie salary structure, salaries were just going through the roof, and it was killing the NHL. So in 1995, they decided to lock them back out again to see if they could get another crack at controlling salaries. Things done. They managed to reduce the roster size from 18 skaters and 2 goalies to 17 skaters and 2 goalies. The playoff money increased. It went from 3.2 million to 7.5 million in 1991-92. In 92-93, it went up to 8 million. And you also consider with not a very good TV deal in the 90s, especially in the US. Canada wasn't bad. CBC paid their share, but the US, they didn't get a very good contract. The local TV deals also weren't that great with the radio deals. So the revenue wasn't really producing. You had skyrocket salaries. So, the owners at that point in time decided that they would try to control the amount by doing a salary cap try. But this didn't work. Players really didn't get much out of it. They actually didn't get anything at all out of it. And the players didn't get much out of it either. So really, they lost half a year for nothing. Actually, the first time Gary Bettman, the commissioner of the NHL, actually tried to reshape the NHL with the new CBA. And it kind of backfired. Like I said, it backfired on him. So really, Bob Gooden, the NHLPA's president, has actually had now 2 successful wins when it comes to labor disputes, a lockout and a strike. Around 2000, Gary Bettman and the owners started also talking about labor disputes again and how this financial structure of the NHL just wasn't working out for them. To get a hard cap set in this next CBA. Ask, what is a hard cap? A hard cap is basically the NHL teams can only spend so much money on salaries. And it's all based on a percentage that they agree upon. Let's say 55% of the total revenue of that league can only be spent on salaries. The other 45% immediately goes to the owners. This means that no matter how much money you make on your local TV deals and local radio deals and your local advertising, you can still only spend whatever that percentage says the league can only spend on money. For instance, if they says it's 55% and the total revenue is divided up that way, that means then you can only spend $55 million on salary throughout the whole thing. In other words, every rich team and every poor team can only hit that $55 million range. Now, these are all hypothetical numbers I just gave you. This is nothing that has to do with the current CBA or how the numbers really were planned on being structured. These are just numbers I pulled out of my head to give you an example of how a salary cap worked. Of course, obviously, what the owners hoped to happen was they wanted to control expenses through a salary cap, meaning that big market teams or teams with a lot of money couldn't outbid lower market teams, which is driving up the cost of salary. Now, the NHL PA's Bob Gooden basically came out once he got wind of this and said there will be no salary cap. I don't care how long this dispute is going to last. If it's going to last a year, there'll be no salary cap. If it's going to be 2 years, there will be no salary cap. If it's 3 years, there will be no salary cap. The salary cap will not happen. That's what the NHLPA's stand was during this whole entire time. Of course, the reason why was the NHLPA and the players love to have the free market system set in place because the bidding war benefited them tremendous. When two teams got into a "I want you" scenario, they knew their salaries were going to go through the roof. So in the 2004-2005 season, the face-off began. Gary Bettman and the NHL owners and Bob Gooden, the NHLPA president, and all the NHL players had a major dispute on how they were going to control the new CBA, the Collective Bargaining Agreement. That's actually the thing that controls how the leagues ran. And the NHL owners and Gary Bettman wanted to connect revenue with salaries, which meant a salary cap was going to be put in place. So to control the salaries, Gary Bettman and the owners decided to put a hard cap of $31 million proposed in the new CBA, which would equal to a 28% salary reduction. Because if you look at the list of some of the salaries of some of these teams, it's pretty amazing the haves and have-nots at that point in time in the NHL. An example of that would be the Detroit Red Wings, the team that actually pays the most money for its salaries. It's actually paying $77 million at the time for his salaries. Nicholas Lidstrom, he's making $10 million. Dominic Hasek, he's making $8 million. Curtis Joseph, he's making $8 million. Shanahan's making $6.5 million. Chelios is making $5.8 million. Eisenman's making $5.8 million. Hatchett, he's making $5 million. Brent Hall, he's making $5 million. I mean, these are going to be future Hall of Famers, all on one team. Like I said before, their total salary was $77 million. And you compare that to the low-end group, which would be Nashville, the 30th team. Remember, there's only 30 teams in the league at that point in time. They only had a $23 million salary. Minnesota only had a $24 million salary. Florida only had a $28 million salary. There was a big difference in salaries. And Detroit was not the only one. The Rangers had a $77 million salary too. They had Bure at $10 million. They had Leach at $6 million. So they were like way up there too at $77 million. Dallas had a total salary of $67 million. Philadelphia's total salary of all their players was $65 million. Toronto's total salary of all their players was $61 million. So, there was a huge difference between the top teams and the bottom teams, which is kind of interesting because if you look back then, 14 out of the 30 teams were below the average salary of $40 million total payroll, which, that's half the league was below the average payroll of a team. Since there was no restriction on how much you could pay a player, the high-end teams could always outbid the low-end teams. For instance, Detroit. I mean, they had a future Hall of Fame roster. So because all the stars wanted to go to one team and just dominate the league. And that's what happened. I mean, it was obvious Detroit was going to win a cup that year because of the talent they have. So it was no real surprise when they did. And you look at them when they went and played against Nashville, it's like, or Minnesota, there's no way those small teams could ever compete with a team like Detroit or the New York Rangers because of the payroll. And because of that, you had those high-end teams making a lot of money off of local TV deals, a lot of local radio deals, merchandise that the low-end teams just didn't have because they didn't have the fan base to draw from. That's why the NHL owners and Gary Bettman decided to put a hard cap of salary reduction of 28%. Of course, the players union didn't want any part of this. So they proposed what they call a soft cap or a luxury tax. And basically what that was you set a certain standard amount of money. Well, they proposed $40 million. Anybody who was above the $40 million payroll would have a tax put on their salary. And that tax would go to the lower end teams that would help them fund some of their salaries themselves. For instance, at the 40 million mark at that point in time, teams like Detroit, Philadelphia, Dallas, Toronto, Colorado, and St. Louis and the New York Rangers would all be above that. So they would get a little extra tax put on their salary to help those lower end teams fund some more players. Which sounds fine and dandy if they think it in concept. But you also then you have to convince the player to actually sign for these low end teams. Which, why would they do that when they know they have an opportunity to win and win big with the teams like the Detroit Red Wings or the New York Rangers or the Dallas Stars or the Toronto Maple Leafs, teams that have high end payroll and have a very good roster already to begin with. That's always been the big problem with the luxury tax is you're still going to have teams that with haves and have-nots because it's going to come down to not only money, but the players are going to sign with teams that they have a chance to win cups with. And the owners basically philosophy is they wanted a fair, balanced system. They wanted all 30 teams to compete not only on the ice, but off the ice. Have every team have the same opportunity to actually make money and have a competitive team. With a hard cap, they could do that. They could restrict the amount of money teams could pay on the high end, and they also require teams to have to pay so much money on the low end. So all the salaries are basically the same. But if you did have a superstar in the system, you're going to have to actually balance your budget and figure out how to get that superstar's big money. And the hard cap, salary cap, pay structure, and make also then be able to pay all the other guys you're going to need to fit on this team. So the whole concept was that high-end teams wouldn't be able to afford all their superstars, or like Detroit, all their future Hall of Famers. So they'd have to pick and choose which ones they wanted to keep, and then the low-end teams then would have a perfect opportunity to sign those guys to put them on their team. Would turn into then everybody would have an equal competitive league, and all 30 teams would have the same shot at making the playoffs and winning a cup. And then also, since you connected the salaries to revenue, teams that didn't have a whole lot of revenue, then off the ice also could be able to actually break even or actually make a profit because of how the pay structure worked. All 30 teams put all their money into one big pot, and then all 30 teams got the equal amount of money throughout the league. So their theory was Gary Bettman, the commissioner, and the owners' concept would be a fair and balanced team for all 30 teams on and off the ice. And the two ways they were planning on doing this was restructuring free agency and also restructuring their entry-level deals the rookies were having. And that meant by having a rookie pay structure that would not include any signing bonuses or any performance bonuses. It's just a flat pay structure that you're going to get. You get paid so much each year for the next 3 years. So the start of the 2003-2004 season, the lines were drawn. The NHL owners, led by Gary Bettman, decided to lock out the players simply because they did not like how this whole entire CBA was going. They had a proposal of a hard cap of $31 million. That would equal to 28% pay cut across the board for all salaries. Players didn't want anything to part of that. Their proposal was a soft cap with a luxury tax that would start at $40 million. Any payroll is above $40 million would get a tax put on it. So even if there was two different types of pay structure that we had with a hard cap and a soft cap, we're still $10 million in difference on how the actual limitations would be for these caps. They also had wanted to bring down the eligibility levels for free agency, make it easier for people to become free agents at a sooner time so they could get the bigger money earlier. And also, they want nothing to do with the rookie limitations on how much they can make. But some had to give because during the 2002-2003 season, the NHL lost $273 million. So that wasn't going to happen again. So 2003-2004 season, they had to change something. The other problem with this whole entire pay structure before the lockout was there was only a small group of teams that had any chance of winning cups because all the big time free agents in the NHL were only going to go to these teams. They were only going to go to teams that had a legitimate chance of winning cups because one, those teams had the money to pay them. And number two, they had elite athletes already signed on these teams. The lower level teams didn't have that. I mean, they had money to pay them, but they only had average players. So those low level team fan bases knew there was no chance they were ever going to even get to a conference final, let alone a chance of winning the cup under this old system. So after basically wasting the first part of the season, negotiating a $10 million difference in how the hard cap, soft cap was going to occur, exactly what the pay structure would be like for the rookies for the first 3 years, what the free agency age is going to turn out to be when they will be eligible for free agency. On February 15th, 2004, the owners gave a final proposal, and that would be a $42.5 million hard cap. And the same proposal is rookies would not be eligible for any signing bonuses or performance bonuses the first 3 years. It would be just a hard pay structure for those, hard cap pay structure. They only got a flat rate every year for those 3 years. Also, they would move the free agency from age 30 or 10 years down to 7 years or 27 when you're eligible for free agency. This was a take it or leave it deal. And unfortunately, on February 15th, the NHLPA decided to reject that, which caused them to then close the season down for the whole entire year. Yes, the NHL owners and Gary Bettman locked out the players for the whole entire 2003-2004 season. And it took until July 15th of that summer in order to determine what their actual agreement was. And that was actually really a hard deadline, too, because if they would have gone a little bit further, they would have canceled out the next season. But luckily, they had a deal done that was going to be a hard cap of $39 million. That's as much money as the NHL owners would pay for all their salaries. And the floor, they had to at least pay $23 million on salaries. They also had a 3-year pay structure for the rookies. They only allowed to make so much money for the first 3 years with no signing bonuses and no performance bonuses. They also did move the free agency down from 10 years down to 7 years, or age 30 to down to 27. So now you could be a free agent at age 27, or at least be at least 7 years in the league. So you think at that point in time everything would be all good. But unfortunately, we had 5 teams automatically over the salary cap. Atlanta, Boston, Detroit, New Jersey, and Tampa Bay were above the $39 million. And the reason being was because of injuries or performance bonuses or how their contracts were already restructured before the lockout took place. So, to solve this problem, they decided to kind of manipulate the rules that they already agreed upon. For instance, New Jersey Patrick Elliott had a $4 million cap hit. He was on long term IR. So they made an exception to say that they could waive that money. Same thing with Detroit's Nicholas Cornwall. He had a $1 million cap hit, but he was on IR. So they let him go ahead and waive that. Atlanta, Peter Bondra was really interesting scenario. His cap hit was only 3.4 million, but this thing was loaded with incentives. That's how they managed to sign him because Atlanta didn't have a whole lot of money. They gave him a lot of incentives. So the real question was, what were they going to do with that? Because that put the Atlanta over. If he got all the incentives, performance incentives, that would put Atlanta over the cap hit. The other one was really interesting was Washington Capitals and Jaromir Jagr. Jagr was making 11 million before the salary cap was put into place. And they knew they would never be able to actually afford Jagr with that 11 million under this $39 million cap. They got a brilliant plan. What they were going to do is they're going to trade him to the New York Rangers. The Rangers are going to pick up $8 million of his salary, and the Caps are going to keep the other $4 million, which meant that the GMs are already trying to manipulate the cap to fit their team under that cap at this point in time. Gary Bettman, and that's the commissioner, and Bill Daly, the deputy commissioner, had to put the brakes on these little ways of manipulating the cap because we've already got GMs trying to cheat a little bit. Because you got to remember, after this cap broke and the agreement was settled at 39 million, Detroit already had 16 players signed at $38 million. And that doesn't include a young sensation, I should say. They weren't rookies. Pavel Datsyuk or Zetterberg, they still had to get them under the cap of 39 million. Colorado Avalanche, they only had 10 players signed at the time, and they were already at $21 million. Dallas Stars, they had 8 guys already signed, and they were already at 22 million. The New York Rangers, they had 6 guys signed, and they were at $21 million. The Toronto Maple Leafs, they only had 8 people signed, and they were at $27 million. So that's why there was a little bit of manipulation going on. But Bettman and Daly, Bettman the commissioner, Bill Daly the deputy commissioner, kind of set up some ground rules for that too, saying that long-term injury reserve, you can go over the cap for that. But the signing bonuses and performance bonuses do go against the cap. But the big catch was you were allowed to go over the cap for like injuries, but they also put a clause in it that says if you went over the cap that year, the next year you'd have to have your own salary cap reduced by how much money you went over that cap for each individual team. In other words, if the salary cap is 39 million and you had to go over it by 42 million because of injuries, the following year, since you went over it by 3 million, instead of having your cap the following year at 39 million, it's automatically going to be reduced to 36 million because you went over the year before. Now, of course, 20 years out, they've manipulated these rules again and changed all the rules all over again. But you can still see exactly how that actually occurred. It actually caused the almost 2 years worth of labor disputes to get this salary cap the way it is now.